folks, Scott here with my 10 cards from the My Monthly Hero September 2018 card kit. This is all a autumnal, fall-themed. I believe it features a Chinese lantern plant. 2 satin ribbons in a brown and like a rust. This is our 6 by 8 inch clear stamp set. Looks like we have 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7 sentiments on this. These look like maple leaves. These are those Chinese lantern plants. I believe these are 2, some pots, a saucer, very build your own bouquet type stamp set. And of course, we get the matching frame cuts, 18 of those. I imagine those match most of the shapes in our stamp set, and we also get a window fancy die and a frame. This is looks like all floral. It's kind of open. Here's frame cuts in the middle. We'll have to take a look at that. Another oval window die. Gosh, that's my 3rd, 4th one already. Thank you, Hero Arts. And then we do have another smaller package which contains our goodies. This month we get a Daniel Smith dot card. This is extra fine watercolor. I've played with Daniel Smith dot cards before. Beautiful, lovely watercolors. We get that, plus 5 little mini brushes. When they say mini, I think they mean mini. Those are little itty bitty tiny brushes with kind of it kind of feels like a flare, a felt tip pen. 5 little mini brushes, and then translucent leaf notes. Sticky page markers. There's 30 of them. Wow. Oh, very, very, very thin. Actually very translucent as well. Ooh, and shiny, kind of plastic. About half of them have some sticky on the back of it. Those are interesting. So that's all she wrote. There's our stamps, our dies with a fancy frame die, our Daniel Smith watercolor dot sheet, some translucent sticky notes, and 5 little mini brushes. Let's start playing with this stuff and see what it inspires. I do have to admit that I was a little underimpressed with this set when I first saw it. I thought this stamp set was a little schizophrenic, and I was hoping that I'd be able to do something more than just stick plants in pots, put them on a saucer, and call it a card. For my cards this month, we've got variety card bases. Black card base, this is my Staples Ivory cardstock, a number of white cardstock bases, a craft cardstock base, and a dark red craft core cardstock. We did get a Daniel Smith dot watercolor card and these mini brushes, so I figured we are supposed to be watercoloring. So when inspiration is slow to strike, I figure why not grab that window fancy die and frame and start working with that first. So on a black card base, our first card today uses that fancy window die, and we've got a nice "You Bring Color to My World." I did use the Daniel Smith dot watercolors for this, and I used those mini brushes. I have to tell you, I did not care for these mini brushes at all. I think ultimately they just don't hold enough water for me. I found myself adding way too much pigment to this watercolor paper and kind of destroying the tips on most of these mini brushes. So that's one of the nice things about watercolor paper and watercolors is you can keep working them and keep working them and keep working them until your paper literally falls apart. So that's what I did on this die cut. I did die cut this out of my standard Strathmore cold press watercolor paper. I really grew to like this die much more than I first thought I would because it's usable in virtually any orientation. I decided to go with it in this direction. I cut the watercolor paper with the frame die as well. And I also took another piece of watercolor paper and did this background. Now, I used my own brushes for this background and lots of water. I do have to remind myself that those Daniel Smith watercolors are highly pigmented, especially the red ones, and those colors go a really long way. I'm really pleased with this kind of sunset background I got here. And I thought I needed a little bit of definition between the die cut and the background. So I took my largest stitched rectangle die and cut out 3 pieces of black cardstock, and then cut the fancy die out of the middle of those cardstocks and glued them all together, glued them behind the watercolor die cut, and added them all to the top of my black card base here. So there's a really nice chunky black kind of outline around that whole fancy window die cut that I think gives just enough of a separation and a nice little chunky dimension to this card. You Bring Color to My World, I stamped in my VersaFine Onyx Black ink and embossed that with some clear embossing powder for a little bit of shine. I ended up really liking this card. I finally took a little bit of a thin white gel pen and added little white highlights around on this. I thought that brought a little bit more life to these leaves and a little bit more life to this card. There's nothing on the inside, just a writing surface. Very autumnal. Now, I wasn't quite ready to dig into the stamp set yet. So I took the leaf notes. I thought these leaf notes were really very interesting and very, very pretty. There are 30 of these little plastic leaf notes. I decided that I should take the maple leaf die that was included in the kit and cut these down to make some more card-friendly sized maple leaves. Here you can see I chopped a bunch of these down with that die, and that's what inspired this next card from me. On a ivory card base, we get Happy Autumn with all of those great maple leaves falling down and making a pile on the bottom. I was able to line up the veins on a lot of these die cuts very nicely, but quickly realized that if I did that, I would only get 30 die cuts completely, only one die cut from each of the big leaves, and I thought that was a little bit wasteful, so I started just cutting from side to side and not paying a whole lot of attention to the veins. I knew I wanted to put a pile of leaves on the bottom. So I stamped this sentiment using my archival acorn ink. I stamped the sentiment on some ivory cardstock and embossed that with clear embossing powder so it would echo the shine on all of those leaves, and then arranged all the leaves on the front of this. I actually used my multimedia mat to glue all of these leaves down and was really thrilled that you cannot see the glue behind those leaves at all. You cannot see that glue. I was getting ready to mat this and mount it on a card base, and I grabbed this piece of dark red Craft Core cardstock. This is from the Tim Holtz Nostalgic Collection. I bought these on sale. Great colors. The dark red I thought worked really well. And I was putting that up behind my ivory card front, and I decided that I really liked those leaves sticking beyond the edge of the ivory card front and going onto the red. So you can see that where the leaves actually continue onto the frame around the card. I thought that was fun and much more interesting than just trimming off the leaves at the ivory cardstock and matting it on this dark red card base. Happy Autumn, a great tumultuous falling of autumn maple leaves. Okay, so let's get into the stamps. Now, there are 7 sentiments in this stamp set. You know I'm a little obsessive and want to try and use every stamp on my 10 cards. So I figured I would use those 7 sentiments. I've already used 2 of them here, so I have 5 more to go. And I did think there was one sentiment there that I could punify up just a little bit. So that inspired this 3rd card, again on an ivory card base. We've got Branch Out. Now, I did want to stamp these branches on some craft cardstock. I thought that would alleviate having to color all of them. I did die cut those out, and I did use a die template to cut out these branches. I thought they were a little detailed to get a perfect cut. So just stamping the die out of a piece of scrap cardstock, you can tape it down over your stamped image and really get your die cuts very, very close and accurate. So I did use a template for these branches. I cut out all 3 of these branches, decided we'd go for a monochromatic card here, and stamped the saucer and this short squat vase out of craft cardstock as well. I then went in with a white colored pencil and added light highlights to the branches, to the vase, to the saucer as well, and gave them just a little bit of pop, a little bit of color, a little bit of variation in their plain craftness. I did take that Mummy Bauxite Brown watercolor from the Daniel Smith dot sheet, and I thinned it out quite a lot and just took a couple of swatches across the bottom of the card with a wide flat paintbrush. That became the base for this card. I did cut a slit in the top of the vase and cut a slit in the edge of the saucer to slide the end of the branches into, and I stamped the branch out directly on the card base, again with the Acorn archival ink, and I again embossed that with clear embossing powder. Branch out. Get it? There's a branch out. Okay, I'm pushing it a little bit here, but I thought there was a tiny bit of a pun to be had here. I really like the feeling of this card. I really like those branches are nice and detailed and kind of craggly. Branch out. That's card number 3 on an ivory card base. Now, we do have that sentiment in this stamp set that says, "You are vibrant." So I wanted to do a vibrant card, and I thought that those Chinese lantern plants might be the way to go. I did some research online and found out what Chinese lantern plants are and what they look like and what their colors are. So I stamped all of the 3 Chinese lantern plant stamps on some Bristol Smooth cardstock with my onyx black ink and set to coloring them. I decided that my Zig Clean Color markers were the right things to go with for this vibrant card. I think the colors in those markers are much more vibrant than the colors that we got on the Daniel Smith dot card. So that's what I used on this, my Zig Clean Color Real Brush markers. We've got "You Are Vibrant." I did, of course, go in and create some die templates for all 3 of those lantern plant stamps. I tell you, after you color up an image and spend so much time coloring it, I hate to get a die cut wrong. So these templates really, really help and really make those die cuts very accurate. Better than I could ever do just lining them up, especially on a very detailed die like these plants. I pieced all 3 of these cutout stamps together in a nice arrangement, kind of interwove their leaves here in the middle. I stamped the large vase and colored that with my Zig watercolor markers. I also stamped that little pod as if it had fallen off of this arrangement. I put these all together and stuck them through a slit in the top of this vase, and I realized, hey, that covers up a whole card right there, using all 3 of those lantern plant stamps and that tall vase. That covers up a card almost completely. So I figured that's what we do. We put this on a plain white card base. I stamped the "You Are Vibrant" in the onyx black ink as well to match the outlines on all of the stamps. I really like this. I like that arrangement. The 3 plants seem to go in the right directions to pair them all together and shove them all in one vase. You are vibrant. I really like my little pod down here. I actually got that little highlight by not painting that little dot. I actually didn't go in there with my white gel pen and add that dot, but that's actually a spot where there are no watercolors. You are vibrant, and by golly, I think this card is particularly vibrant. So we also had those skeleton pods and a little bitty dot in our stamp set. Well, with my research on these lantern plants, I did figure out that that dot was a berry that goes inside of that skeleton pod. So I did a little experimenting. I did stamp that dot in just some red ink and then stamped the pod over the top of that. That's what it's supposed to look like, but I thought this was really kind of flat. So I thought I'd try doing it on a black card base and embossing it in gold. This came out fairly nice, but you kind of lose the red dot in the middle of those pods. So finally, I decided what these really needed was some dimension to those berries. So I grabbed my stamp platform and a couple of my red inks. I stamped that dot fully with the Simon Says Stamp Watermelon Hybrid ink. I stamped that a couple of times. And then I cleaned that off and took the Hero Arts Red Reactive ink and just stamped up one side of that stamp. I closed that down onto the berry twice with two stampings, and that added a really nice shadow along the bottom left edge of that berry. Then a simple stroke with a white gel pen to add highlights on the top right opposite the shadow, and that gives us a berry that you can be proud of, a berry that actually has some dimension to it. It's not just a flat dot. And I tell you, once you stamp those pods over the top of it, a really, really interesting effect is given. This is my next card. Life is Full of Beauty. And those are those lantern pods with the little berries inside of them. The shading is almost imperceptible, but I think it adds so much to the life of those pods. I really, really like this. I stamped everything on my ivory cardstock. I did color up the branch and the flowers and buds with my Zig Clean color markers. I die cut everything out. I did, of course, create a template to use for that branch. I didn't use a template for the pods or the flowers. Those were fairly simple and pretty easy to line up. I did trim everything down and attach the flowers and the bud to that branch, attach the 3 pods to that branch. I stamped that sentiment, Life is Full of Beauty, in the Hero Arts Red Reactive ink and embossed that with some clear embossing powder just for a little shine on the top of this. I really like this, but didn't know quite how to finish this card. And then I grabbed a piece of dark red cardstock and a couple of circle punches from my stash and started punching a bunch of circles. I thought those would go very well with the red berries inside the pods, so I created a little top and bottom border using big and small dots of dark red cardstock. I thought that finished out this card very nicely. Life is Full of Beauty. And let me tell you, those are really some beautiful stamps there. Really, really nice. Everything is mounted to this craft card base with foam tape for a little dimension. I really enjoy the uniqueness of these Chinese lantern plant stamps. So that covers those Chinese lantern plant stamps in all of its forms. So let's move on to the maple branches and the maple leaves in this stamp set. On a white card base, I grabbed that maple leaf branch and created this thankful card. I really like this quite a lot. I stamped those branches with my archival acorn ink again on some Bristol Smooth cardstock. And this time I went back to the Daniel Smith dot watercolor sheet, and I used that to color up all these leaves and these branches. I was much more familiar with the colors, a little more familiar with the high pigmentation of these watercolors, and got some really nice coloring on these maple leaves, on these branches here. Very pleased. I did, of course, create another die template to assist me in cutting these out. I then took a plain piece of white cardstock, cut that out with my next smaller stitched rectangle die. I would be lost without these. And I stamped the thankful just above the center of this card panel. And then I sent it through my printer to add the I am so for you. And this is in the Lucida Grand font. I am so thankful for you. That makes this a little bit more personal. After I ran that through my printer, I did go back and emboss the thankful sentiment with some clear embossing powder. I added the two branches to the card front with some foam tape, little tiny pieces of foam tape. And then I matted that panel to an orange matte and then a craft matte, thinner and thicker, and then to a white card base. Really pretty card. I really like I am so thankful for you. I like giving some context to that sentiment. This is very pretty, very maple leafy. So I used the maple leaf die on this card, but I haven't used the maple leaf stamp yet. Now, Gina K at Gina K Designs a few months ago came out with this Wreath Builder template. And I thought it was very simple and straightforward, yet very effective concept for stamping a wreath on a card. So I went ahead and created my own homemade Wreath Builder template with a piece of very thick cardstock, and had been playing around with that a little bit and haven't really created a wreath card yet, but I thought that that maple leaf might make a good wreath. So for card number 7, we've got Best Wishes. A perfect place for a wreath and this sentiment to go together. Best Wishes. Now this is stamped with the acorn ink on a panel of Bristol Smooth cardstock. I colored all of these leaves with the Daniel Smith watercolors. Now I put the leaf in the template in one direction and stamped 4 of them. I then moved the leaf in a different direction and stamped the other 4. I did do some experimentation using some of these stamps with that Wreath Builder template. Some of them are just too big. I think the Wreath Builder template really wants small stamps. This is that maple leaf with all of the leaves going in the same direction. I think changing direction on half of them really made it much more interesting. This was my final trial and error here that said, yeah, we can do those in different directions. I used that dot stamp on this, but thought it was a little too heavy, a little too much. So on the final card, I reached for a little bitty 3-dot stamp. I have very few little bitty tiny stamps, but these little collection of 3 dots worked perfectly in the larger gaps on this wreath. I colored those as well with that sap green Daniel Smith watercolor, and then added the Morning Dew Nouveau crystal drops on top of all of those spots. I thought the Best Wishes stamped in the center of that wreath with that acorn ink was perfect. And what goes best with a wreath? A bow does. So I took the 2 pieces of ribbon that came in our kit, tied a little double bow, and wrapped those around my card front. I glued that down to a mat of Auburn Pearl Coordinations cardstock. I've had that in my stash for a long time. Worked really well on that. Glued these all to a white card base. Nothing on the inside. A nice autumnal wreath with maple leaves. Best Wishes. That's my first wreath card. I really like that. Okay, so now I've used the maple leaf stamp and the maple leaf die, but I haven't used the maple leaf stamp and die together. So why not, for our next card here, we're on another plain white card base, we get fallen for you. There you go. There's a nice little pun for you folks today. This covers 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. That covers the 7 sentiments that are in the stamp set. So I was left with a little free rein to create my own sentiments. Now I took that smooth branch and 6 of the maple leaves, stamped those all on Bristol Smooth cardstock with my acorn ink, and die cut those all out. I arranged those on the front of this card. This is just a piece of plain white cardstock cut out with one of my stitched rectangle dies, of course. This Fallen for You I created using my Silhouette software yet again. This is using the Blackjack font and the Lucida Grand font. I thought those worked very well and were kind of along the same line as the sentiments in this stamp set. I mounted that white card front to a yellow mat and then to, again, that Auburn Pearl Coordinations cardstock for a thin mat, and then onto a white card base. I'm really impressed with how differently this branch looks here than it looks on this card. Simply by changing the orientation and putting different leaves on it, makes it look almost like a completely different stamp. Fallen for You. Now there's a card with a reason for the season. Okay, I have 2 stamps left to go in this stamp set. And I got the idea for this card in the midst of making all these cards and thought it was a really fun idea. This is a very simple card, very straightforward. For everything, there is a season. Now that, of course, is a quote from Ecclesiastes 3:1. Everybody knows this as that song, for everything, turn, turn, turn. There is a season, turn, turn. It's an old Birds song, is that correct? Way old. I took that simple branch with the leaves and stamped it 3 times using my stamp platform, evenly spaced down the left side of a card front. This is virtually a 1-layer card. I stamped those 3 times, and then I masked off the leaves and just stamped the stem the 4th time, just so I could get the placement correct. Then I stamped the whole stamp on a scrap of white cardstock, broke out my light table, put the stamp behind the cardstock and lined up the stems, and then just drew in the rest of this branch with my brown micron pen. I think that is really, really sweet. This is kind of an inside joke to all us stampers. I love the fact that you've got same stamp, same stamp, same stamp. What happened to all the leaves? I did use some really thin white gel pen to add little touches of snow on that branch for my winter branch. Simple coloring on these, very light green, a dark green, a yellow, and a touch of orange. Those are tiny, tiny stamps. I did, of course, use my Zig Clean Color markers to color these just because they were so tiny. I did print this sentiment using my Silhouette software. This is using the modern number 20 font and the Blackjack font again. These fonts, of course, I will have links to these fonts on my website at CardCutups.com if you're interested in getting them. I believe all of these fonts are free for personal use. This card tickles me very much, probably more than it should. To finish out this card, I took a couple strips of the almost black Craft Core cardstock from this nostalgic collection, trimmed a couple of little strips, and added those to the top and bottom of my card. Those framed this out nicely. Nothing on the inside. A very plain, straightforward, 1-layer card. So I have one more stamp to use in this stamp set, and that's this little berry branch right here, a branch with all the little berries on the end of the branches. As I was working on those Chinese lantern plants, my thoughts turned to bonsai, which are very oriental, and I wondered if I could possibly stamp stamp a bonsai using one of these stamps. So for my last card this month, we've got on that dark red Craft Core cardstock, size matters not, Yoda. Yes, I'm quoting Yoda on the front of this card. Although he is a fictional character, I think everybody in the world knows who he is. And yes, he did say size matters not. And I thought that went extremely well with a bonsai tree, which is all about small. I did a couple of interesting things with the stamps here. I actually took that saucer stamp and I made it much smaller. I masked off half of it and stamped the right half. I masked off the other half and stamped the left half and made the saucer much smaller so it didn't overwhelm the size of my bonsai here. I took that berry stamp and I stamped it once, twice, 3 times, and then I masked off a portion of it to stamp that 4th branch coming out of the side there. I did use my brown Micron pen to build up a little bit of a dirt pile in the bottom of this saucer, and I used it to widen the bottom trunk of the tree. So it's a little wider at the bottom, thinner as it goes up. I did use the Daniel Smith watercolors to color all of the berries and to color the saucer here. I soon realized, of course, that most bonsai are in mossy covered substrates. So I went in with my white gel pen and added lots and lots of little dots to that dark brown dirt pile in the bottom there. I let that dry and then took my Zig Clean Color markers and a couple of greens and covered up all of the white dots with green. That was really nice, very mossy. And then for a final touch, I took my green Zig marker and added little touches of green leaves to every empty branch on these stamps. Just that nice little touch of green adds a lot to this little bonsai plant. Size matters not. Of course, that wasn't enough for me. I had to go with a bona fide pun on the inside of this card. I think it goes with this sentiment on the front just perfectly. So you open it up and you get, "You are tremendous." Now there is a pun for you. I did take that white panel, cut it out with a stitched rectangle die. I added that to more of that very dark brown, almost black Craft Core cardstock and mounted that to a dark red Craft Core card base. Lots of fun with a quote from Yoda. I really, really love that little bonsai tree. So those are my 10 cards using the My Monthly Hero September 2018 kit. I am pleased to say that I used every single one of those stamps in this stamp set on these 10 cards. Woohoo-ka-choo! I ultimately had a really good time with these stamps and dies. I really like these Chinese lantern plants. Once I figured out what those dots were and how to use them, I thought this gave us a beautiful effect. I think it's very interesting that these kits inspire different styles of cards from me from month to month. I don't think these cards look anything like the coffee cards from last month. The basic simplicity of a lot of these cards, I think, really highlights the coloring and the composition, and I'm especially thrilled that I was able to come up with a few puns with this set. Slight though they may be, there's still a few puns here. Thank you so much for sharing your time with me here today. I am thrilled to be able to share some smiles and a little bit of inspiration with you each and every month. Please like me, list me, pin me, post me, share me with all of your friends. Don't run with scissors. And by all means, happy autumnal crafting. would like more detailed information, better pictures, and product links, please visit my website at CardCutups.com.